So family is now the primary place, as well as it always should be and has been, where these morals and values are formed. But they're not getting it in other places. And sometimes when the parents aren't getting it someplace else, then we're talking about what are the values and the morals that are happening within our society. Within the 20th century, when we moved from the agrarian to the industrial age, we went from the single school room house where they still were using, typically in the United States, we're going to talk about Christian values is typically what it would have been going through the 18th and the early 19th century. Once you get over into 1960, though, you start here, 1960, you start getting the progressives, such as John Dewey, that starts really thinking, you know, character education is really what's going to be resolving the problems. This goes down to the tenement housing and so forth that was taking place during that time within the cities as the Industrial Revolution was really taking hold. But even though he came up with these ideas, they didn't really have a huge impact within schools. They started to, but not on a big scale. By the time we get to 1960s and 1970s, what character education is taking place in the schools really goes on a decline. 1963, Supreme Court outlaws prayer in school. You get to the 1960s, you get to moral relativism that was happening within the country. You also get to an influx of new ethnic demographics throughout the country. So there started becoming a question of what really are our unifying morals and values within this country. So many schools just stopped having purposeful, and I want to be clear when I say it, not because character education takes place throughout the entire time. I'm talking about purposeful, intentional character education. So declines throughout the 1960s and 70s. You get to 1980s and 90s, as the time I was in, mostly throughout my schooling, in high school and so forth, there's a decline in academic performance and a severe rise in behavioral issues throughout public schools. So 1992, character counts was established. And that's when character education really starts becoming something that researchers are looking at in a lot more in-depth manner. 1992 to get up to 2005, now we're having some very good scientifically based research within character education. Some researchers that if you are interested in this, I would advise you to take a look at. Dr. Martin Seligman, based out of Penn State University, known as the father of positive psychology. He was mentioned in that video that we got cut short there that talks about universal character strengths. In fact, within your packet, there is a page that has 24 universal character strengths. He did this research where he surveyed hundreds of thousands of people around the globe and identified 24 universal character strengths that irregardless of where you are, what your religion, what your ethnic, social, economic background is, these were valued. Now, different cultures place them in different orders, but generally speaking, all of them were accepted as values. In fact, one of my assignments when a student gets in trouble and they come into my office, one of the first things I ask them to do is I ask them what they did. I'd give them that paper and I'd say, I'd like you to look through that. I'd like you to identify your 5 character strengths. They look at me like, what? Aren't you going to talk about why Mrs. Jones kicked me out of class? I said, no, right now, I want you to pick out your 5. I said, pick out the 5 you think you have or you want to have. They write them down. Then I come back and I say, now write me how you demonstrate it. You can tell me you're respectful, but how do you show it? What do you do to demonstrate your character? And then I have them write that out, and then that starts our conversation. Now, most of the time, it comes back to, now let's talk about why you were removed from class. But wait a minute, what you're removed from class for is contrary to what you're saying your character is. It's contrary to what you're saying your values are. Now we're going to a part, I'm talking about their behavior, not saying you did this wrong. I'm now coming to and saying you identified this as what it's important and who you are. You're not living up to your own values and what you say you are. Now I've got a hook with them. Now I've got more buy-in with them of why this is important to think about and why this should change their behavior, and hopefully Mrs. Jones won't kick them out next time. I actually asked them to take that assignment home, have their parents sign it, and have a conversation and turn around and ask their parents, Mom, Dad, what are your 5 character strengths? Had some great conversations with parents, and they've come back and said, you know, I never stopped and thought about that. I never came back and said, what do I value? Carol Dweck, Growth Mindset. Angela Duckworth, again, author of the book Grit. Just some fantastic research to take a look at. So, climate and culture. The culture of a classroom is influenced by the expressions, encouragement, and expectations of the teacher and the students. The classroom climate, is an outcome of its culture. Culture is primarily affected by the physical setup of the room, its scenery, and its senses. These are just different definitions based on Awakening the Learner, another great book by Marzano and Scott, I think of his first name. He was the father of Rachel Scott, who was the first victim in the Columbine shooting. He and Dr. Marzano wrote this book together called Awakening the Learner. Again, fantastic book that talks again about this art and the science of teaching and of character education. So within your packet that you have there in front of you, it has a couple things. It talks about how do you break down and analyze the culture and the climate, whether it be of your school or whether it be of your classroom. So I'm not going to read through all those. You can kind of take a look at that, but if it's in your packet, I encourage you to take a look at it. Because what I'd like to ask you to do would be, first, taking a look at your climate and ask yourself, can you identify what you think these are? What can you identify within your climate and the culture of your classroom and your school? What is evidence of these different factors? So just take 1 minute of time, look at that packet. I'll actually back it up here as well so you can see culture, and then I'll go over to climate. And then say, what evidence do you see of that? And again, in your own classroom, do you stand at the door and greet people? Do you have music playing when they're coming in? Now, I know I'm kind of being somewhat silly. I tried to stand at the door to role model that. I tried to have music playing when you came in. Actually, another time I did a presentation, I walked around with some orange spray and sprayed the orange spray around there, and some people walked in, they had that smell. But you're really engaging all the senses. So what evidence do you have of what you're doing in your classroom, or what are you doing school-wide to affect your culture and the climate? Go ahead and take about 1 minute. If you're with people from your own site, you can turn and talk if you want to. You can just look at it on your own. And if not, you can take a look at something else or look at Twitter or whatever else you want to do for about, let's do it just 1 minute. Just kind of get those individual thoughts flowing.
We all think that.
And that gives a mixed message to the kid, because the kid kind of doesn't understand. I go into class, I put as much in but you can see like I think the ones that are good though. You can tell some of the kids they come and I was just kind of and they like a bit more to do yet. Because I think they have like some messages or they'll be like, I think they kind of because they don't, but it's not their normal. But hopefully when more of our teachers are getting captured into playing on this just go back on. Oh, that's going to be fine, don't you think?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was
to facilitate the conversation. Like my class, really that works for everybody. I wish we didn't have to follow our because I would like to put up more stuff. I mean, I don't like clutter the place and make it look more great, but I would like to put up more stuff.
The follow-up, I want to have a conversation.
With my Western age days, I know that I don't, kids, I don't always, I'm not super effusive. It doesn't mean I hate you, it just means it's different way.
They say to me all the time, God, you never smile much. And I say, well, I'll let you know.
This is what my mom and my dad did.
It's a side smile.
That might
Like
change
that was
what
the
they
thing,
think.
like I know a teacher, I don't play music. I mean, I do every now and then, I'll play kind of quick music in Spanish.
So I have a conversation
I'll play fight songs. I'll play.
Do you love that song?
Because I like to write.
Inspirational, motivational.
So thinking about how you engage your students, as I was just talking with a couple other people, it really has to be individualized. There's no one thing that says, do this. And I think that's an important part to think about as you go through all of character education. It has to be customized. It has to fit your school's unique personality, your classroom makeup, your personality. Again, as I was sharing just a moment ago, I know one teacher who loves doing call and response. She'll sit there and she wants to get the kids to quiet, and she's a big Giants fan. She comes in, she says, I say Buster, you say Poser, Buster, Posey, Buster, Posey. Great, and they're all quiet. I know some teachers that look at that and say, I could never do that. That sounds like the weirdest thing in the world for me. That's fine. You got to fit what's going to go on. I know some teachers that use a meditation bell. I know some that just have talked to their students about classroom expectations when they come in. But there are ways that we can engage their senses. What we have up on our walls says a lot. When you walk into a classroom, when I do observations, I walk into a classroom, first thing I start doing is I start looking at the walls. What does this tell me about this classroom? What are the values? If I walk into a classroom and I see 4 posters about the rules of the classroom, I'm concerned. There should not be 4 signs around there. That tells me that teacher's more concerned about the control than she is about the learning that's taking place in there. There's another great example of what I did see in a couple classrooms over at my school, would be, I love the famous failures. She actually had the students all do a quick little report. So she tied in her English standards, she tied in using some tech skills, she had the students research different famous people and what their failures were, and trying to really go with the growth mindset of failing at something is a part of life, and learning that when you fail at something, it doesn't mean you are a failure. It's a first attempt in learning. So that's another great thing. And then the digital citizenship. This is something that, again, that we focus on more and more with our students, with how much trouble they can get themselves in. With, I loved what I heard from George yesterday when he was talking about, we did all these sort of things that we just didn't have phones to post them up there. Oh my God, am I grateful that was not around when I was a kid. Some of the things that I did, if that would have gotten posted up, I would never be getting a job today. So I feel for the students, which is all the more reason why we have to educate them, because character also goes to character online as well, and realizing how that can impact their future. Because more and more colleges are looking at people's social media, and they're looking at these sort of things, and it's going to have an impact on our students as they move forward. So if we ignore that, we're putting them at a disadvantage for the future. Again, just another one of the fun activities that we've done there. What do you want to be? Just have the students write out a word, post them up there so they walk in there. Again, just inspiring the students when they come in the classroom. So that we already did this activity. That was that reflection there. Kind of ahead of myself. So everything has to be looked at through the lens of character. So our words matter. I was at my 20th high school reunion a few years back, and I bumped into Richard. I remember Richard, we weren't close in school, but I remember Richard, going back to the 80s, what we would call a rocker or a stoner would be his classification. The long hair, the Iron Maiden t-shirt, leather jacket, that was Richard. But I saw him there my senior year, and we're at the reunion, and we're talking, and he looks at me and goes, I actually didn't graduate. I said, what do you mean, Richard? I saw you there. I saw you second semester of our senior year. He's like, yeah. I was walking around the corner one day, and there was the assistant principal and the counselor, and they didn't see me walk up behind them. And the counselor looked at the assistant principal and said, God, that Richard Hansen's a fuck up.
Oh.
He goes, I grabbed my bag, I walked out the front door, second semester of my senior year. Wow. I've thought so many times when I heard that, what did that person think of that careless, not thinking comment and how it impacted the student? Now, did Richard have other things going on in his life? Was it just that one thing? I'm sure it was a multitude of things, but that was the moment that broke him. And he looked at me and he said, he goes, I'm a dad now. He goes, I talk to my son all the time about, gotta stay in school, don't let people drag you down. He goes, I manage a bar. He goes, that was the best job I could get. What difference would have happened in my life had I just stayed in school, had I made a few other different choices? Saif is another story I like to tell. Now, this story has something to do with me as well, but what I want to say is I'm sure all of you have had these moments. I was just fortunate this time to have a student come back and share this with me. But Saif was a student at the high school, and I was the dean of students. I would say my job description as dean of students was drug, alcohol, fights, and parties. That was my job description. It was real fun. The deputy sheriff joked that I was his partner. So Saif could not stop smoking pot. I mean, we talked and talked. It finally got beyond, I'm going to suspend you or you're in trouble. It finally came down to, I'd see Saif in the morning, I'd go, did you get stoned this morning? He'd go, yeah. And I'd go, buddy, Being stoned and going to algebra does not work together. You're not going to remember the quadratic equation after you go to math when you're stoned. Come on, man. So I sent him articles. We had conversations in my office. I talked to his mom. It was no longer about discipline. It was what we're going to do to help this kid. Time came. I moved on, became assistant principal in another school, lost contact with Saif. Years go by. I'm at my job, assistant principal at the school I'm still at. And the secretary comes back, knocks on the door and says, "There's a man here that wants to see you." Okay. You never know what you're going to walk into, by the way, when that happens. You don't know if it's an angry parent. You don't know. I was kind of like, oh, God, what is this? So I walk up there, and there is Saif in a shirt and tie, put together. He comes over and he says, "Hey there, Mr. I said, Saif, so good to see you." He goes, "You know, I just graduated from college. I just had my first professional interview. And I looked you up and I wanted to come back and say thank you. Because I would have never made it if it wasn't for you." It's like my favorite moment in my career. And I don't try to say that boastfully. I am sure you all have had those moments. I hope you get the moment where that student comes back and tells you, because that is fuel in the tank to keep you going. That's when you wake up in the morning on those days that you're like, oh, today is really going to be hard. Those are the moments that you remember, this is why we do the work we do. Because we have the ability to change people's lives. We have a greater opportunity than so many other people in other careers to affect the world that we're in. That when the time comes for us to die, as it will happen for all of us, we can all close our eyes and say, I made a difference in this world. And that's powerful. Our everyday actions, that is the best character lesson. And the best character lessons happen usually in your classroom in the context of the lesson you're teaching. There are times to say, we're going to talk about character. It's International Character Day, let's talk about character. Those are valuable. But truly, the best character education is in the moment, in your classroom. Whether it be you're talking about history and you want to talk about what were the motivations of the people, what was the character behind these decisions. You're in science, you want to talk about the ethics of gene manipulation. Whether you're in economics and you want to talk about social disadvantage and what the economics of poverty are. There are so many opportunities to teach character in the moment and in the context of your classroom. Or as an administrator, when that student comes into your class, into your office, and you have that opportunity, is it all about you're in trouble? Or is it talking about something much deeper than just that superficial level of why that student happened to be in trouble? So right now on the table, you have what we call the tree of character. If I ever can find the time, I'll finish writing the book that I'm writing, but it's all based on part of it talks about this graphic. It goes a lot more deeper than just the graphic there. But what you see underneath the soil are things that we don't have control over. There are things with our students that we do not have control over. That's just a part of the culture of the school. Might be as I'm looking at, it might be the geography, it might be types of learners you have, it's going to be their personal experiences, what's happened to them, the cultural norms, the traditions that they come from home or from their community. So there's things that we don't have control over. So what do we have control over? We have control over what values do we talk about? What are our guiding principles of our school or of our classroom? And those are the roots. So I'm going to walk you through this activity pretty quickly, again, because thinking of the time, like I said, trying to condense a 2-hour thing into 1 hour. But what I'd like you to do is to take a moment. Here's an example of what this. We actually had all our students in the school do this. This was an activity we've done as a staff. There's what is in your classroom. We've done this activity with our students and had them identify what are their root values. And we've also then done this as an administrative team of what are truly the values of our school. What do we stand for? What roots us to the ground? So what I'd ask you to do would be to start with the roots. There's a periodic table of character strengths. You saw that a little bit on the video. That's actually should be within the packet if everyone has that, or if you can share that at your table. And what I would ask you to do would be take a moment and identify what are your root values of your classroom or of your school. Now you may have already done this. We actually did the time before actually this activity, and we figured out what are the root values. So take a moment and let's just take 2 minutes. Whether you want to do it by yourself or talk to the people there, what are the root values of your school, if you're an administrator, or of your classroom as a classroom teacher?